You've been asked to record yourself in two different registers, both casually and formally. So, in this lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about what are the components of register and some of the significance, social and rhetorical, that various registers bring. But I want to begin by talking about another concept, that of persona. Persona comes from a Latin word that literally means mask. That might be disturbing at first. We like to think about our persona as something that's unique to us, not something that can be taken off and put back on. We have the idea of the mask as something that is false or unreal. But another way to think about persona is that a mask is something that people identify you as when you're speaking. And it's not something that you're fully in control of. That's why the idea of the mask is really helpful when we're thinking about various kinds of register. For instance, sometimes we might put on what I call the ancestral mask when we're speaking. This might come when we are quoting a sacred scripture, let's say the Quran or the Bible, the Tanakh, anything like that, where we're certainly not speaking in our own persona when we're quoting that. We're invoking potentially divinity when we're speaking from a sacred scripture to another person that also believes that that scripture is sacred. Or sometimes even proverbs or adages that are traditional in a culture. When we use something like that, we're putting on the ancestral mask, meaning that for the moment, we're not speaking in our own persona. That's one of the things that changes the register of our speech, is that our persona is representing something other than our social individual personality. But even when we get into more casual or intimate or formal kinds of registers, that same idea of the persona still applies. So we might say that the gesture of intimacy, the intimate register when we're talking with our very close loved ones, is a kind of gesture of taking off the mask, of saying, with you, I don't have that same persona that I put on, that same face that I put on when I'm talking with people that I'm not intimate with. And even that, in some ways, is a persona. It's something that has to be performed consciously and learned through our lives. And the various kinds of intimate registers change very widely across cultures, in different families, and historically. There's work that shows us that the intimate register in Europe really develops quite late, perhaps roughly the 18th century, where there's something that's really recognizable as an intimate register, and it is associated with the rise of the bourgeois family. So the casual register that we're going to talk about today and the formal register are really the two that are going to be most important for our class, learning how to vary between those two and the various significances and aspects of just those two. But of course, as I've kind of teased, there are lots of other ways of thinking about register. There are lots of other kinds of registers that you might name or identify. None of these things is perfectly objective. There's no register instrument that you can take to a speech and say, oh, well, it's in this register. It's a way of naming and classifying things that allows us to better understand certain phenomena or features of speech. And if these categories don't work well for you, please feel free to ask me questions about them. But also feel free to kind of invent and play around with your own conceptualizations of register as you're listening to speech in your daily life. So when we're contrasting casual and formal registers, we're going to look at a variety of elements. The first one is vocabulary. The vocabulary in a casual register might be really slangy. It might include words that are colloquial. It might include a lot more abbreviations. So for instance, if we're going to take the phrase something like, in a neutral register, it's time to go to sleep, something like that. In the casual register, we might say something like, it's bedtime. In a formal register, the vocabulary might be more elevated, if not technical. I would say that a technical register might be a little different than a formal register, but it might be a little bit more elevated. So we might say the same phrase is something like, we must end this gathering, depart, and retire. Now, if you said that to someone that you were just friends with, they'd be either look at you strange or laugh, because that register is too elevated for a casual situation. And so vocabulary and choices about vocabulary and diction will vary and change the register based upon your audience and the situation. Back to that idea of the rhetorical stance. So beyond vocabulary, what else differs? Well, what are the assumptions that are part of that rhetorical situation, that rhetorical stance in any situation? My relationship to the audience and my relationship to the thing that I'm speaking about, that part of the rhetorical stance. In a casual register, I'm going to assume that my audience already knows that what the relationship is with me, and they already kind of know where I stand in relationship to the thing I'm talking about. So I can be much more implicit. I don't have to make all of those relationships explicit. Whereas in a formal register, even if I know that my audience knows who I am and knows my relationship to the thing that I'm talking about, I'm still probably going to make it explicit. I'm going to bring it into speech. And we're going to see that when we see a way that someone is formally introduced. When, let's say, a speaker is invited to speak at a university, we'll often hear something say, someone that needs no introduction, just before they give a long introduction of the famous person that is about to speak. Because the idea is that this is part of what is setting the register for the kind of speech it is. If it's too casual, it might seem to not do justice to the situation. It might seem to not honor the person, because in a casual situation, we're imagining everyone as peers. Everyone is on the same level. In a formal register, we're not necessarily clear about where everyone stands, but we're not assuming that everyone is a peer, and so that someone who's being honored might be honored in a more formal register more clearly than in a casual register. Also, back to the level of language, syntax will differ. If we go back to that idea of it's bedtime versus we must end this gathering, depart, and retire, or something like, although I have enjoyed this gathering so much, nevertheless, it is time that we adjourn. Something like that. The complexity of the syntax, dependent clauses and independent clauses, indicates a more formal register. A dependent clause is a part of a sentence, although it has been a lovely evening, that can't stand by itself. That's a dependent clause. We must adjourn. That's an independent clause. It can stand by itself as its own sentence. A casual register is going to be a lot less like that, a lot less subordination where you have dependent and independent clauses. It's going to be a lot of simple sentences, maybe sentences with conjunction. It's bedtime and I'm really tired. Something like that. Finally, we're going back to that idea of the persona. The persona in a casual register makes a gesture towards the equality of everyone in the situation. So the persona or the mask that I'm putting on, I kind of presume that the audience could put on themselves. So I'm not going to make a lot of gestures to things that are unique about myself, things that elevate me or make me a specialist in some subject of knowledge or power or ability. Those kinds of things would be off-putting in a casual register. There are some comedians that have used this joke. There's a bit that Jim Carrey did once where he said, we're all familiar with what it's like when you have to choose between your 3 Lamborghinis. Kind of a corny joke, but you get the idea that the casual register there misses the mark because it assumes that the audience would be able to make that kind of decision, and very, very few people would be able to make that kind of decision. In the formal register, the persona is a little bit more complex. We can say that the persona there doesn't necessarily stand for me being above the audience, that's just being arrogant, but rather that the persona represents something that is above all of us. It stands for, I'm speaking on behalf of an institution or an idea or the event itself. And that's something that you're going to take into doing a formal introduction. Who are you speaking on behalf of? Who are you introducing yourself as? And that's what makes this assignment a little bit more complex than just the casual introduction. You have to make a decision about who you represent as you introduce yourself. And you can be creative with that. Obviously, this is an assignment. There's not a specific situation that you're imagining here. Whatever you decide, whether it's to say, I'm going to introduce myself on behalf of the class, you're imagining some entity that is the class that is going to kind of speak through you in some way. So to give you a little demonstration in as brief amount of time as I can, I'll compare my own casual introduction with a formal introduction of myself. Hey guys, my name is Tim. I am your instructor for business and professional speaking. I'm really glad to have you all here, and I can't wait to hear more of your introductions. Good afternoon, and welcome to Business and Professional Speaking. My name is Dr. Timothy Barr, and today I really want to talk to you about rhetorical ideas, this tradition of rhetoric that is, I think, going to really help you to make concerted decisions, clear decisions in your own speaking and in a variety of different contexts. So hopefully you can tell which one is casual and which one is formal. Those are very condensed, obviously, and could have been improved. However, when I'm just introducing myself casually, I'm just a peer. I'm just kind of saying, hey. When I'm talking formally, I may be representing an institution, which is why I mentioned my degree status, but I'm also representing a tradition, which is rhetoric. And so that idea that informs the way that I'm introducing myself is I'm imagining that mask, and what is speaking through the mask isn't just me when I'm doing a formal introduction.